You're listening to The Observing Eye. Pirate radio for the mind. Coming at you fresh from the computer hell cabin.
Hello, you beautiful lot. It's Friday, the 19th of July, 2024, and you're listening to episode 74 of The Observing Eye, coming at you live from the computer hell cabin. Every week, we get psychological, philosophical, and all manner of introspective. I'm David, and this week, we are looking at the delusional psychology of consumerism. But first, some news. It's officially 2 years since I started this project. Not the podcast, but The Observing Eye itself. See, before it was a podcast, it was a newsletter on Substack. And to celebrate the second anniversary, I've decided to have a rebrand. There's been a shake-up. The logo has changed. We've got more pirate. At least I've leaned more into the pirate radio for the mind aspect of this thing. I was looking over the branding and just thinking that it wasn't me enough. I'm comfortable with all your criticism now. I've been doing this for 2 years. My skin has hardened. I'm feeling able to lend more of myself to the whole branding side of things. We're all about authenticity here, right? So let's get more authentic. Part of this change has involved that rebranding. And I started out on Substack because this was a newsletter and it seemed like the perfect platform at the time. Substack, if you've not come across it, is very oriented to sort of journalism, newsy blog kind of stuff. So we went there. But since then, this whole thing has evolved and the content has diversified. We're on YouTube. There's a book that comes with this thing. And we've gone heavily into various different types of content. So after a lot of deliberating, I've moved our home to Patreon. It's just a better platform for what The Observing Eye has become. So we're now on patreon.com/The Observing Eye. I've kept it the same. Everything remains free. You just have to follow as a free member to get the written articles and all the behind-the-scenes stuff. There's something coming on the YouTube side as well for those of you that listen to the podcast videos on there, so keep an eye out for the changes next week. Okay, newsflash done. Let's talk about what we're here for. Rampant consumerism. Think about the last time you bought something. Maybe it was a new gadget, a piece of clothing, or even just a cup of coffee. What drove you to make that purchase? Was it a genuine need, or was it something else? Perhaps an advertisement you saw, a friend's recommendation, or a fleeting desire for something new and exciting. In today's world, we are bombarded with messages telling us that happiness, success, and even our very identities can be bought. But is that really true? And what are the psychological mechanisms at play that make us believe it? In today's episode, we're going to peel back the many layers of consumerism. We're going to look at the historical roots and its evolution. We're going to look at the psychological mechanisms that are employed within consumerism. We'll look at the economic and environmental impacts and the impacts that it has on our own mental health. And finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about trying to break free from that cycle of consumerism. So thank you for joining me today. Let's dive in. Let's start everything off then by taking a journey through time and space to understand the history and evolution of consumerism. My hope is that by exploring its roots, we can better understand how we've arrived at our current consumer culture and the psychological mechanisms that underpin it. So we're going to begin with early consumer societies. Now, while the term consumerism is modern, the basic idea of acquiring goods and services has been around for millennia. In ancient civilizations like Rome, Egypt, and Greece, there were already signs of consumer culture. The affluent class would often purchase luxury goods such as fine fabrics, exotic spices, the spice must flow, and intricate jewelry to display their wealth and status. These items were not just about utility, they were about signaling power, prestige, and identity. As we move forward to the Middle Ages in Europe, consumerism was relatively subdued compared to ancient times. Feudal societies were largely agrarian, and most people produced what they needed. However, there were still marketplaces where merchants sold goods, often imported from far-off lands, catering to the nobility and emerging merchant class. Even then, the seeds of consumerism were being sown as people began to desire more than mere necessities. The real explosion of consumerism, however, began with the Industrial Revolution in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. This period was a game changer. The advent of machinery and mass production techniques transformed the way goods were produced and consumed. Factories could now produce items on a scale never seen before, making goods cheaper and more accessible to a broader segment of the population. The Industrial Revolution also marked the birth of modern advertising. As companies competed to sell their mass-produced goods, they needed to create demand where it didn't previously exist. Advertisements began to appear in newspapers and later on radio and television, painting products as essential for modern life. This was the beginning of a shift from a needs-based economy to a wants-based economy. As we move into the 20th century, the aftermath of World War II brought about a significant economic boom, especially in the United States. The 1950s and 60s are often seen as the golden age of consumerism. The war had ended, economies were thriving, and there was a new sense of optimism. During this time, consumer goods like cars, televisions, and household appliances became symbols of success and modern living. Suburban life flourished, and with it, a culture of keeping up with the Joneses emerged. The idea was that owning more and better things would lead to a happier, more fulfilled life. Advertising played a crucial role during this period. Companies hired psychologists to better understand consumer behavior and develop more effective marketing strategies. The goal was to tap into the desires and aspirations of the consumer, often linking products to personal happiness and social status. This was a time when jingles, slogans, and brand loyalty became ingrained in the consumer psyche. Moving into the late 20th and early 21st centuries, consumerism has evolved even further with the rise of digital technology and the internet. E-commerce has revolutionized the way we shop. Online platforms like Amazon have made it possible to purchase virtually anything with just a few clicks, anytime and anywhere. This convenience has only intensified our consumption habits. Social media has also played a role in modern consumerism. Platforms like Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok are rife with influencers and targeted ads that constantly bombard us with new products and lifestyle ideals. These platforms have blurred the lines between content and commerce, making it even harder to resist the pull of consumerism. Influencers, with their curated lives and seemingly endless array of sponsored products, create a perpetual sense of desire and aspiration among their followers. But consumerism has its critiques and challenges. The environmental impact of our consumption habits is becoming increasingly clear. The production and disposal of consumer goods contribute significantly to pollution, climate change, and the depletion of natural resources. Apparently, everyone's testicles are full of microplastics now, so that's the thing. Now, this awareness has given rise to movements advocating for sustainability, minimalism, and ethical consumption. People are starting to question the true cost of their consumption habits and seek alternatives that are less harmful to the planet. The evolution of consumerism from ancient times to the digital age reveals a complex interplay of economic, social, and psychological factors. From early societies where goods were symbols of status, through the industrial era of mass production and advertising, to the present day's digital and influencer-driven culture, consumerism has continually shaped and been shaped by human behavior. It's this whole ontological feedback thing, isn't it? We create technology and technology in turn redesigns us. Understanding this history is crucial for recognizing the pervasive nature of consumerism in our lives and contemplating ways to engage with it more mindfully. And now, a word from our sponsor. A few episodes ago, I mentioned that this podcast would never be sponsored because I felt that having a sponsor would impinge upon my freedom of expression and artistic and creative vision and all that kind of thing. And that has since changed, unfortunately. The podcast is now sponsored, I'm a terrible hypocrite, but the podcast is sponsored by me. So I feel that that's an acceptable sort of grey area in which to exist when it comes to contradicting oneself. Now, when I say I'm sponsoring this podcast, I am sponsoring it with my new book, which is called The Observing Eye, A Guide to Living a More Authentic Life. Now, it's available on paperback and on the Kindle via Amazon, exclusively on Amazon, because there's a Kindle Unlimited deal that I have to adhere to for 3 months. But you can find it on there. You can go and search The Observing Eye on Amazon, and I will put the link in the show notes or description as well, so you can find it there a little bit easier. So the book essentially is a complement to the podcast, and the purpose of the book is to give you some philosophical and psychological tools and ideas to challenge your own perception, your own self-narrative. It's all about storytelling, about how storytelling and narrative shape who we are and our identity, and how we can change that narrative. So it's definitely got a narrative therapy vibe to it, put it that way. And it's out now. It's been out for a few weeks. And if you'd like to go and purchase a copy, that would be wonderful. And I'd really appreciate it. So that's my sponsor window. There we are. My book is out. You can buy it on Amazon. Links in the description, or you can just search The Observing Eye on Amazon as well. Thank you for your time, as always. Much love. And now back to the episode. Now it's time to look at why we as individuals are so drawn to consumerism. What makes us buy things that we don't necessarily need? Why do we often equate material possessions with happiness and success? Let's explore some of those psychological underpinnings of our consumer behaviors. Of course, we're going to begin by looking at the need for status and identity. Human beings are inherently social creatures. We care about our standing in the social hierarchy, and consumer goods have become a way to signal that status. This isn't a new phenomenon. Even in ancient societies, as we discussed earlier, the wealthy would showcase their status through possessions. Today, brands and products serve as modern symbols of status. Wearing a designer label, driving a luxury car, or owning the latest tech gadget can all signal success, wealth, and taste. These items are not just objects, they are statements about who we are and where we stand in society. The role of brands in shaping our identity cannot be overstated. Brands have evolved from mere markers of origin to complex symbols loaded with meaning. When we buy a product, we're not just purchasing its functionality, we're buying into the brand's narrative. Think about brands like Apple, Nike, or Tesla. They don't just sell products, they sell a lifestyle, an aspiration. This is a powerful psychological driver because it taps into our need to belong and be recognized. Owning these brands can make us feel part of an exclusive community, boosting our self-esteem and social identity. But what about the emotional triggers that drive consumer behavior? Advertisers are masters at exploiting our emotions to create a desire for their products. One of the most effective emotional triggers is happiness. Ads often depict joyful, idealized scenarios where the product is central to the happiness portrayed. This creates an association in our minds between the product and positive emotions. For example, a car commercial might show a family embarking on a perfect road trip, implying that buying the car will lead to similar happiness and family bonding. Fear is another powerful emotional trigger. Fear of missing out, or FOMO, is a common tactic used in advertising. Limited time offers, flash sales, prime days, and exclusive releases create a sense of urgency, making us worry that we'll miss out on something valuable if we don't act quickly. This taps into our innate fear of loss and drives us to make impulsive purchases. Nostalgia is another emotion that marketers love to exploit. By evoking memories of the past, ads can create a warm, sentimental feeling that makes us more likely to purchase a product. This is particularly effective with products that are tied to our childhood or significant life events. When we see something that reminds us of a simpler, happier time when we didn't have to pay mortgages or go to work 9 to 5, we're more inclined to buy it in an attempt to recapture those feelings. Another crucial aspect is the illusion of choice. In a typical supermarket, we are presented with an overwhelming array of products. On the surface, this seems like a good thing. More choices should mean we can find exactly what we need. However, research shows that too many choices can actually lead to anxiety and dissatisfaction. This is known as the paradox of choice. when faced with too many options, we can become paralyzed, fearing that we'll make the wrong decision. And this, of course, can lead to decision fatigue and ultimately impulsive purchases. We can't make a decision, so we'll just buy whatever's in front of us. And I get this. Like, I go to the supermarket, I'll go to my Tesco's or my Sainsbury's or whatever, and I don't need to have really an option of 30 different types of cheddar. Cheddar is cheddar, right? Cheese is cheese. So I'm just sort of sitting there deciding which is best. And the one that I think is best is generally going to be either something that I've bought before and liked, or something that I've been influenced to purchase through word of mouth, through advertising or whatever else, or something that's on offer. Oh, this cheese is £3 cheaper than that cheese. I haven't tried it before, but I'm sure it's delicious. It's just cheese, right? But this is the thing. Same thing. I don't need 10 different types of white onion. A white onion is a white onion. So yeah. This is the drama that we face. But what about the real role of advertising and media in all of this? Advertising is this hideous, omnipresent thing, shaping our desires and perceptions, often without us even realizing it. The power of persuasion in advertising lies in its ability to tap into our subconscious. Through repeated exposure to certain messages, we begin to internalize them. A classic example is the association of certain brands with positive traits, like sophistication or success. Over time, we start to believe that owning these products will transfer those traits onto us somehow. And of course, social media has amplified this effect exponentially. Platforms like Instagram and TikTok are filled with influencers showcasing their very sort of curated, carefully designed lifestyles. And these influencers are very often sponsored by brands, which make consumerism look glamorous and desirable. We see their posts and we feel a pull to emulate their lives, leading us to buy the products they endorse. This is particularly potent because it combines the power of social proof with the accessibility of online shopping. We can go from admiring a product in a post to purchasing it within minutes. Lastly, let's touch on subconscious influences. Subliminal messaging, while much less overt today than in the past, still exists in various forms. We're not talking MK Ultra yet, don't worry. Now, more commonly, repeated exposure to advertisements and brand messages subtly shapes our preferences and desires. When we see a brand repeatedly, it becomes familiar, and we tend to develop a preference for it, a phenomena known as the mere exposure effect. The psychological drivers of consumerism are deeply rooted in our need for status, identity, and emotional fulfillment. Advertisers and marketers very skillfully tap into those needs, using emotional triggers, the illusion of choice, and subconscious influences to drive our consumption habits. But my hope is that by understanding these drivers, we can become more mindful of our purchasing decisions and better equipped to resist the constant pull of consumerism. Leading on from our look at the psychology behind consumerism, I'd like to dive into the role of advertising and media and in that in a bit more depth and how they shape our consumer behavior. Now, of course, as we mentioned, advertising is everywhere and it influences our thoughts, our desires, and our decisions without us necessarily realizing it. And a lot of this comes down to the power of persuasion. Advertising is fundamentally about persuasion. It's getting us to want and ultimately buy a product or service. To do this effectively, advertisers will use a variety of techniques, and one of the most common is emotional appeal. By tapping into our emotions, ads create a connection between the product and a desired feeling. So think about a soft drink commercial that shows people having fun at a party, or the old Diet Coke adverts, I don't think they show them anymore, where it was just like a buff guy with his top off, coming like outside of an office building, cleaning the window, and then like all of the women would just gawp at him while he drinks his ice cold Diet Coke on a hot day. Sexy. It's the emotional appeal. It makes us more likely to associate a product with positive feelings and thus more likely to buy it. Another technique that they use is social proof. Now, this is the idea that we look to others to determine what is correct or desirable. When an ad shows people using and enjoying a product, it sends the message that this product is popular and that we should want it too. Celebrities and influencers play a big role here, as their endorsement can significantly boost a product's appeal, because we often admire these figures and we want to emulate their choices. But how has advertising evolved with technology, particularly with the rise of social media and influencer culture? So traditional advertising was a one-way street. It was a broadcast. Companies would send their message out via television or radio or print, heaven forbid print, and consumers would passively receive them. Social media has turned this model on its head. So now advertising is a fully duplex communication. It's a dialogue. It allows us to interact and engage with the advertiser. So brands don't just talk at consumers. They're about engaging with them now. They're about creating a dialogue. They look at building a sense of community. And influencers are a crucial part of this new advertising landscape. These are individuals who have built large followings on social platforms like YouTube and Instagram, what have you. They share their lives, their interests, and their recommendations with their audience. Now, when an influencer endorses a product, it feels like a personal recommendation from a friend, thanks to this whole parasocial thing that we've got going on, rather than a traditional ad. Now, this can be incredibly persuasive, especially for younger audiences who spend a lot of time on these platforms. Influencers often seamlessly integrate their products into their content, making the advertising feel much more natural and less intrusive. The effectiveness of social media advertising is enhanced by the platform's ability to target users with incredible precision. Algorithms analyze our online behavior, what we like, what we share, what we comment on, and even how long we linger on certain posts, to build detailed profiles of our interests and preferences. This data is then used to service ads that are tailored to our individual tastes. So it's not like where we would watch a film and there would be loads of adverts about shit that we weren't even remotely interested in. Now it's all about, they know what we like and they will very specifically, like guided missile target adverts that they know are going to get a better uptick from us than just scattergun, like buckshot advertising. Now, of course, while this can be convenient, it also means that we are constantly exposed to highly personalized and persuasive advertising, making it even harder to resist that pull of consumerism, like a great big black hole, it feels like. There's also a lot to be said for subconscious influences in advertising. So while overt subliminal messaging, like flashing words or images too quickly for the conscious mind to process, has largely been debunked, more subtle forms of subconscious influences are pervasive. Now, I don't know if you've seen the film They Live, great film, Roddy Piper, and he has these magical sunglasses. Well, they're not magic, they're sort of science fiction sunglasses. When he puts them on, he can see that some of the people are actually these horrible looking aliens with like no faces and big gawping eyes. And when he looks up at the billboards, instead of the adverts, he just sees the word obey, sleep, consume all over the place. So yeah, go and watch that movie if you haven't seen it. It's absolutely brilliant. I think it's John Carpenter as well. So that should be an endorsement in itself, really. So subliminal messaging, we're talking about the mere exposure effect. And this is a phenomenon where we develop a preference for things simply because we are repeatedly exposed to them. Advertisers will capitalize on this by ensuring that we see their products and logos frequently, which over time makes us more likely to choose their brand over others. Another subconscious tactic is the use of colors, sounds, and visuals that trigger specific responses. For example, fast food restaurants often use red and yellow in their branding because these colors are believed to stimulate appetite and create a sense of urgency. Similarly, background music in stores can be strategically selected to influence our shopping behavior, such as playing slow music to encourage us to linger and potentially buy more. The impact of advertising and media goes beyond just influencing individual purchases. It shapes our broader cultural values and norms. Advertisements often portray idealized versions of life, beauty, and success. These portrayals can create unrealistic expectations and pressures, making us feel inadequate if we don't measure up. This, in turn, fuels further consumption as we try to buy our way out of this pit to the idealized life, the unattainable idealized life that is presented to us. So all advertising does is, from this point, is perpetuate a cycle of constant desire and dissatisfaction. By perpetually introducing new products and trends, advertisers ensure that we never feel completely satisfied with what we have. There's always something newer, something better, something more fashionable that we should covet and desire and want to place in our homes. And it just keeps us in this this eternal state of wanting, driving the engine of consumerism ever forward. So we can see from all this that advertising and media, as I know you're aware, plays a deeply profound role in shaping our consumer behaviors and even, horrible to think this, our cultural values. Through emotional appeal, social proof, targeted advertising, and subconscious influences, they create and sustain our desires like some hideous parasite just feeding on our emotions. Now, by understanding these mechanisms, I hope that we can become more aware of how our behaviors are influenced and make more conscious choices about our consumption off the back of that. You know, self-awareness is 90% of the battle, right? If we're aware of what's going on, then we can see it and we're able to actually do something about it. I'm hoping... I kind of didn't want this podcast. I'm not really... I don't like consumerism, I'll be honest. I think it's a fucking cancer on our society, but I'm hoping that this episode doesn't come across too biased towards that. I'm trying to make this balanced, but my emotions are coming in, as you can hear, I'm sure. And that's going to impact how I present things without me necessarily intending to. So I'm doing my best to make this balanced, but I fucking hate advertising, marketing, all of that consumerism shit. I'm not a fan. So that's going to reflect in this episode. Just full disclosure, let's be transparent about it, right? Anyway, let's move on to our next section. Okay, rant over. Let's look at the economic and environmental impacts of consumerism now. So we've talked about the history of consumerism. We've looked at the psychological drivers behind it. I've had a rant about advertising and media. But what does all this consumption mean for our economy and our planet? Firstly, there is the economic impact of consumerism. Consumer spending is a major driving force in many economies, particularly in developed nations. In the United States, for instance, consumer spending accounts for about 70% of the GDP. This means that the economy heavily relies on the continuous purchase of goods and services by individuals. When consumers spend more, businesses thrive, jobs are created, and economic growth is stimulated. This cycle is often seen as a positive feedback loop that fuels prosperity. However, this consumer-driven economic model also has its drawbacks. One of the key issues is the creation of economic bubbles. When consumer confidence is high, people tend to spend more, often going into debt to do so. This can create unsustainable economic conditions, as we saw in the lead up to the 2008 financial crisis. People were borrowing beyond their means, banks were taking an excessive risk, and when the bubble burst, the consequences were devastating. This highlights a fundamental instability in an economy overly reliant on consumer spending. Moreover, the pressure to continually grow and consume more can lead to significant economic disparities. Companies strive to cut costs and increase profits, often at the expense of workers' wages and working conditions. This creates a widening gap between the rich and the poor, as the benefits of consumerism are not equally distributed. The wealth generated by consumer spending tends to concentrate in the hands of a few, while many workers struggle to keep up with the rising cost of living. Now, let's turn our attention to the environmental impact of consumerism. The production, transportation, and disposal of consumer goods have significant environmental consequences, obviously. One of the most pressing issues is the depletion of natural resources. Our planet, unsurprisingly, has finite resources, and the demand for raw materials like metals, minerals, and fossil fuels to produce consumer goods is unsustainable. This over-extraction leads to habitat destruction, loss of biodiversity, and increased greenhouse gas emissions. Speaking of emissions, the carbon footprint of consumerism is staggering. The production and transportation of goods require vast amounts of energy, much of which comes from burning fossil fuels. This contributes to climate change, which poses a severe threat to our environment and future generations. For example, the fashion industry alone is responsible for about 10% of the global carbon emissions. Fast fashion in particular exacerbates this problem by encouraging the rapid production and consumption of cheap disposable clothing. Waste is another critical issue. Our culture of disposability means that a significant portion of what we buy ends up in landfills. Electronic waste, or e-waste, is a growing concern. Items like smartphones, laptops, and other gadgets have quite short lifespans and are often discarded when new models come out. These devices contain toxic materials that can leach into the soil and water, causing environmental and health problems. The packaging waste, especially plastics, further contributes to pollution and threatens marine life. So what can we do about these economic and environmental challenges? One approach is the promotion of sustainable consumption. This means shifting away from the idea that more is always better and focusing instead on quality, durability, and ethical production. We need to move away from this idea of planned obsolescence. But of course, if we don't plan obsolescence, then people aren't going to buy shit. So it's going to go against the whole idea of rampant consumerism. But for us, by choosing products that are made to last, we can reduce the demand for new goods and lessen the environmental impact. Supporting companies that prioritize sustainability and fair labor practices can also help address economic disparities. Another promising trend is the rise of the circular economy. This model aims to keep products and materials in use for as long as possible through practices like recycling, reusing, and refurbishing. Instead of the traditional linear economy where we take, make, and dispose, the circular economy encourages a more sustainable approach that minimizes waste and conserves resources. For instance, some companies are now designing products with modular components that can be easily replaced or upgraded, extending the product's lifecycle. On a broader scale, policy changes are crucial. Governments will play a significant role by implementing regulations that encourage sustainable practices and penalize environmental harm. For example, carbon pricing can make it more costly to emit greenhouse gases, incentivizing companies to reduce their carbon footprint. Policies that promote renewable energy, protect natural resources, and support workers' rights can also help create a more balanced and sustainable economy. As consumers, we have the power to drive change through our choices. By being mindful of what we buy and opting for sustainable alternatives, we can reduce our environmental impact and support a more equitable economic system. This doesn't mean we have to completely renounce material goods, but rather that we should strive to make more conscious decisions about our consumption habits. I will caveat this statement with, yes, we do have the power to drive change through choice, but often the more unsustainable choices are cheaper than sustainable ones. And particularly at the moment, that is not necessarily a realistic option for many. To buy organic, grass-fed baked beans where all of the workers are paid twice the minimum wage, because the products are more expensive, obviously, and we can't all afford that. So please don't feel like I'm saying you have to go out and buy sustainable products. It's an option if you're able to, and it's something that you feel motivated to do. I'm not saying that everybody should do it. If anything, it kind of, I put this in there because I think it's important to mention that, we do have some agency, but what frustrates me a little bit about the situation is it's not down to the individual. It shouldn't be down to the individual to make change. It's like with recycling stuff. So we get these pink bags where I am. We have black bags for rubbish, for trash, right? So the black bags are for the stuff that just goes in the pit, in the landfill, and the pink bags are for things that can be recycled. And I'll recycle stuff. I feel it's a little thing that I can do. But unless we tackle the bigger issue of how things are produced on an industrial level globally, and I'm not naming names, but I think you know where I'm going. If we don't address those issues, me recycling a couple of cardboard boxes and some cans is going to do absolutely nothing. So yes, I think it's, from an ethical standpoint, it's good for us to do something, but let's not feel like it's on us. The responsibility needs to be a much, much broader global thing. To finish up this segment then, the economic and environmental impacts of consumerism are complex, to say the least. While consumer spending drives economic growth, it also creates instability and inequality. On the environmental front, our consumption patterns lead to resource depletion, pollution, and climate change. Addressing these issues requires a combination of sustainable consumption practices, circular economy principles, and supportive policies. And by understanding and mitigating the impacts of our consumer behaviour, we can move towards a more sustainable and equitable future. So we've already discussed the psychological drivers of consumerism, but let's have a look at the psychological consequences. How does consumerism affect our mental health and overall well-being? So let's begin by talking about the link between consumerism and mental health issues. In our consumer-driven society, there is a pervasive belief that material possessions and wealth equate to happiness and success. This belief is constantly reinforced by advertisements, social media, and cultural narratives. However, numerous studies have shown that the pursuit of material wealth and possessions often leads to increased levels of anxiety, depression, and overall dissatisfaction with life. One reason for this is that consumerism creates a sense of inadequacy. Advertisements and social media create idealized images of what life should look like. Perfect homes, fashionable clothes, luxury cars, smeg fridges, and exotic vacations. When we compare our lives to these unrealistic standards, we inevitably fall short, leading to feelings of inadequacy and low self-esteem. This constant comparison can be detrimental to our mental health as we are perpetually striving to meet an unattainable ideal. The constant bombardment of advertisements and media messages can lead to decision fatigue. We are continuously faced with choices about what to buy, where to go, and how to live, which can be mentally exhausting. This decision fatigue can impair our ability to make thoughtful, deliberate choices, leading to impulsive purchases and further entrenching us in the cycle of consumerism. Consumerism can also lead to a phenomenon known as hedonic adaptation, and there is an entire episode on this about 6 months ago, maybe longer, maybe a year back. So I will put a link to that in the show notes, and you can have a listen if you're interested in what hedonic adaptation is. Now, as an overview, this is the tendency for people to very quickly return to a relatively stable level of happiness, despite major positive or negative events or life changes. When we purchase a new item, we may experience a temporary boost in happiness. However, this feeling is often short-lived, and we soon find ourselves craving something new. This cycle of desire and temporary satisfaction can create a constant state of unfulfilled longing, contributing to chronic dissatisfaction and even depression. Another significant psychological consequence of consumerism is the impact of consumer debt on our well-being. Many people finance their consumer habits with credit, leading to mounting debt. The stress and anxiety associated with debt can be overwhelming. It can affect all areas of life, from personal relationships to job performance. The pressure to pay off debt while maintaining a certain lifestyle can create a vicious cycle of stress and consumption, further exacerbating our mental health issues. Consumerism, of course, also affects our social connections. In a society that emphasizes material success, relationships can become transactional. People may prioritize acquiring wealth and possessions over nurturing genuine human connections. This can lead to feelings of isolation and loneliness. Studies have shown that people who place a higher value on material possessions are more likely to have poorer relationships and less satisfaction with their social lives. The culture of disposability that consumerism creates also has psychological implications. When we constantly buy and discard items, it can create a mindset where everything, including relationships, becomes replaceable. This can undermine our sense of stability and security, contributing to a pervasive sense of uncertainty and unease. Another psychological impact is the feeling of entrapment. As we accumulate more possessions, we may feel trapped by our own consumer habits. The pressure to keep up with trends, maintain a certain lifestyle, and manage the financial burden of our purchases can create a loss of freedom. And this, of course, can lead to increased stress and anxiety as we feel overwhelmed by the demands of maintaining our consumer-driven lives. We can see that consumerism has profound psychological consequences. It can create a sense of inadequacy, fuel chronic dissatisfaction through hedonic adaptation, and contribute to mental health issues through consumer debt. It affects our social connections, promotes a culture of disposability, and leads to decision fatigue and feelings of entrapment. But by understanding these psychological impacts, we can gain some insight into how deeply consumerism influences our mental well-being and societal dynamics. And that is where we're going next. In this final segment, we are going to discuss how we can break free from the relentless cycle of consumerism. And I'm going to begin, as I begin many of these sections in this podcast, by talking about mindfulness and a little bit of minimalism. So for those of you who are unaware, who I imagine is not many of you, mindfulness is about being fully present and aware of our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions. When applied to consumption, mindfulness encourages us to pause and reflect before making a purchase. Ask yourself, do I really need this? What value will it add to my life? Am I buying this because of external pressures or genuine need? By becoming more mindful of our consumption habits, we can make more deliberate and meaningful choices. I mean, I've been umming and ahhing about buying an Xbox for about 6 months, and I just cannot convince myself that it will be of value. I just don't laugh. I used to have a PlayStation, but I stopped PlayStations at version 2. Yeah, I fancy an Xbox. I like gaming, but I just can't. I can't justify buying one. It feels like a flash in the pan. It feels like it's ultimate hedonic adaptation. I'll buy it and I'll enjoy it for a month, and then I'll go back to not using it because the novelty has expired. So I do my best to ask myself those questions. What value will it add? Do I actually need this thing? Really? Do I really need it? No, I don't really need it. Now, looking at minimalism, this complements mindfulness by encouraging us to simplify our lives and focus on what truly matters. Minimalism isn't about depriving ourselves, but rather about removing excess to make space for more important things. This can involve decluttering our physical spaces, reducing the number of possessions we own, and prioritizing quality over quantity. Minimalism can lead to a greater sense of freedom and contentment as we shift our focus from accumulating things to appreciating experiences and relationships. I have this rule at home where if I haven't used something for a year, it goes in the bin. Unless it has like real sentimental value, obviously. Oh, photos of my parents, they're going in a bin. No, we're not dark. We're not dark like that. But it's stuff. If there's stuff in a box that's been under my bed for like 6 years, I don't fucking need it. Get in the bin. Get in the fucking bin, mate. You're out. That's it. Declutter. Okay, but when we talked a bit earlier, didn't we? Swiftly moving on. Sustainable consumption, making choices that are better for the environment and society, which essentially means considering the life cycle of the products that we're buying, from production all the way down to disposal. And if we are financially able to, we can opt for products that are made from sustainable materials, that are ethically produced, and that have a lower environmental impact, which, can help to alleviate some of this stuff. And, that might be something as simple as supporting a local business or buying something that's secondhand or picking products that have less packaging. I would personally always prefer to, if I'm going out for a coffee, I would prefer to get a coffee from a local cafe that's actually run by a person rather than a Starbucks or a whatever else we've got, Costa Coffee, or I don't know what brands you all have where you are, but over here we've got like Starbucks and Costa and Cafe Nero and all that stuff. And yeah, the coffee's all right in there, and it might be 50 pence more to buy a coffee from a little shop, but I'd rather do that because there's a human element to it. I look at these big companies and they just feel like big faceless entities. So supporting that to me feels more ethical, feels like I'm doing something better than just throwing money into some C-suite's pocket. Another approach to breaking free from consumerism, and I'm going to say that dreaded word, is to create a sense of gratitude. Consumerism thrives on the idea that we need more to be happy, but if we take a bit of gratitude into account, we can shift our focus from what we lack to what we have. You could do something like keep a gratitude journal where you regularly write down things that you're thankful for, which can help to reinforce that mindset. And it doesn't mean being grateful doesn't mean that you settle for less. It means that you change your perspective to recognize and appreciate the abundance that we have, regardless of how much or how little we possess. And abundance doesn't just mean material stuff. Abundance is the positive, all of the positive stuff in our lives. It's relationships, it's time, it's health, it's freedom. All of these things we have. Remember, this is a human experience. We are human beings, not human doings. It is not all about stuff. The stuff on the shelves, the things in the cupboards. Abundance comes in many forms, and we should recognize that. And by shifting our perspective, because advertising loves us to feel lacking. Advertising wants us to lack. You wouldn't sell a product if people had a sense of abundance. So That's something that we can all do, is to focus on abundance rather than absence. And let's, of course, not forget the importance of education and awareness. Understanding the impact of our consumption habits on the environment, economy, and society can motivate us to make more conscious choices. Educate yourself about the products you buy, the companies you support, and the broader implications of consumerism. Knowledge is a powerful tool for change, and by spreading awareness, we can inspire others to reconsider their consumption habits as well. Don't get militant about it, though. Don't be militant about it. There's no need. Don't force your ideas on somebody else. That's not cool, and that's not how this works. Tell them what you think. Share your thoughts, but allow them to make the decision themselves. I'll also mention here this idea that I came across called slow living, which I found quite interesting. And slow living, I think I do this innately anyway. I just didn't realize there was a term for it. Slow living is about taking a step back from the hustle of modern life and embracing a much more intentional, unhurried way of living. Now, this involves slowing down our consumption, taking the time to enjoy activities and experiences, and prioritizing quality over speed. So it's essentially just being a bit more mindful. So instead of buying the latest, just innately rushing out to buy the latest gadget, take the time to research and choose a product that actually meets your needs and is going to last you a while. And finally, I want to touch a little bit on redefining success and happiness. And I don't even like that word success. I'm going to call it fulfillment. Redefining fulfillment and happiness. Success is a janky word. Consumerism often equates fulfillment with material wealth and possessions. However, true fulfillment and happiness comes from living a life aligned with our values and our passions. Reflect on what truly brings you joy and fulfillment. Is it spending time with loved ones, pursuing a creative hobby, contributing to a cause you care about? By redefining success and fulfillment on your own terms, we can free ourselves from the constant pressure to consume. Breaking free from the cycle of consumerism requires a very multifaceted approach that will include mindfulness, minimalism, sustainable consumption, education, systemic change, altering our perception, all of these crazy things. But it's fundamentally about making deliberate choices, appreciating what we have, and finding fulfillment in experiences and relationships rather than material stuff. By taking these steps, we can pull back our lives from the grip of consumerism and move towards a more meaningful, sustainable, and contented way of living. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is all I have to say on the subject of the delusional psychology of consumerism. As we wrap up today's episode, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've covered. We've journeyed through the history of consumerism, looking at its roots and how it has evolved over time. We've examined the psychological drivers that compel us to consume, often beyond our needs and to our detriment. We've discussed the economic and environmental impacts of our consumption habits, and we looked at the psychological consequences that consumerism can have on our mental health and social well-being. And finally, we've explored some practical strategies and philosophical approaches to breaking free from the cycle of consumerism. Throughout this episode, a common thread has emerged. Consumerism is deeply woven into the fabric of our society, influencing almost every aspect of our lives. It's not just about buying things. It's about the pervasive belief that our worth and happiness are tied to our possessions. This belief is perpetuated by powerful advertising and media forces, creating a cycle that can be difficult to escape. But by understanding the forces at play and the impacts that they have, we can begin to reclaim our agency. We can choose to live more mindfully, to prioritize quality over quantity, and to find fulfillment in experiences and relationships rather than material goods. We can support sustainable and ethical consumption, engage with our communities, and advocate for policies to promote a more balanced and equitable economy. It's important to recognize that breaking free from consumerism doesn't mean renouncing all material possessions or living a life of austerity. Rather, it's about making conscious choices that align with our values and contribute to our overall well-being. It's about finding balance and creating a life that is rich in meaning and connection, not just in things. As we conclude, I'd like to encourage you to reflect on your own relationship with consumerism. What drives your consumption habits? How do you feel about the things you buy? Are there changes you can make to align your consumption with your values and ideals? And always remember that small steps lead to significant changes over time. I want to thank each and every one of you for joining me on this little journey today. I hope that there has been something that you have found useful and you can take away to apply to your lives at large. Of course, if there is anything that has resonated with you in any way, then I would love to hear from you. You can share your stories via, well, it's not via Substack anymore because Substack has gone. We're on Patreon now. You can share your stories at patreon.com/theobservingeye or on social media. And you can find us still at the same places on YouTube at youtube.com/@theobservingeye and on TikTok and Instagram with the handle @theobservingeye as well. Take care, everybody. Much love, and I'll catch you soon.
You've been listening to The Observing Eye. Thanks for spending some time with me today. I hope it's been useful. And if you're interested in any more of my writing or work around psychology, philosophy, and general day-to-day living, please go and take a look at my Substack, which is theobservingeye.com. And that's I as in the letter, not I as in the gelatinous organ through which you see. Take care, everybody. Much love, and I'll catch you soon.